It was one of those afternoons when time itself seemed to take a nap. The air was still, just a faint rustle of summer leaves brushing against the porch post, and the clock on the mantel inside ticked with the kind of rhythm that made you feel the world hadn't moved an inch in years. I sat alone on the porch swing, its chain creaking with every gentle sway, a glass of sweet tea sweating beside me. In the far distance, someone was mowing a lawn, and it smelled like clippings and heat, a scent that always brought me back to childhood before I even realized it. Funny how memory works. One sound, one smell, and suddenly you're not 78, you're 8 back in a world where the sky always seemed bluer, and your biggest worry was whether your dime would be enough for a Coke and a candy bar. It all comes back clearer than it should. The way my brother used to whistle through his teeth, the way Mom would open the windows on hot days and let the whole house smell like fresh cut grass and ivory soap, and how on Sundays the entire family would gather like clockwork. No RSVPs, no text messages, just knowing it was time. Back then, life was stitched together with little things, the things that didn't seem important at the time, but made the whole picture make sense. I suppose it's only in looking back that you realize what truly held it all together. The world didn't rush in 1950. It wandered, it moseyed. Folks had time to sit, to visit, to know their neighbors by name, not just by the sound of their garage door opening. So today, as the shadows lengthened and the porch boards warmed beneath my feet, I closed my eyes and let the past come in not as a flood, but as a gentle tide. And it began like it always does with the house we grew up in. It wasn't much by today's standards. A single-story home, white with green shutters and a porch that wrapped around the front, like a child's arms around a parent's neck. The lawn was big enough for a game of catch, and small enough that you could mow it in an hour with a push mower, the kind without a motor, just blades and sweat. The wood floors inside were real, not laminate or vinyl, and they creaked in places you could map by memory. There was no central air, but if you opened the windows just right, the breeze would snake through the house like it knew the way. On summer nights, you'd fall asleep to the sound of crickets and the distant whistle of a train heading west. In 1950, the average home cost around $400, and most families managed just fine. Ours did. Dad worked at the factory. Mom stayed home, kept the place spotless, and somehow made dinner stretch like it was magic. We didn't think of ourselves as poor. We had what we needed: a roof, a table, and each other. What I remember most isn't what we owned, but how it felt. The safety of hearing your father's boots on the porch after a long shift. The comfort of your mother humming in the kitchen while the pot roast filled the air. The way the curtains swayed in the evening breeze, light as breath. Neighbors weren't just people who lived next door. They were family extensions. Mr. Watkins would come by every Saturday to help Dad fix the fence, and Mrs. Greer, who had no children of her own, baked cookies just because. We didn't lock our doors. Not because we were naive, but because we trusted each other. If someone knocked, you invited them in. If they didn't knock well, it was probably just someone returning a borrowed rake. And then there were Sundays. Sunday was never just another day. It had its own rhythm, slower and sweeter than the rest of the week. We'd wake to the smell of bacon and biscuits and Mom would already be humming hymns while setting the table. There was a dress code, unwritten, but universally understood. Pressed shirts, polished shoes, and for the girls' dresses that fluttered like flower petals in the wind. Church was only a mile away, and we always walked, unless rain threatened the hems of our Sunday best. The church bell would toll just before 10, and every house on our block would empty like clockwork. We sat in pews worn smooth by generations, where every creak of the wood felt like it belonged. The preacher's voice always sounded bigger inside those walls, and when the choir sang, it rose up to the rafters like a promise. I remember how we'd glance at each other during the sermon, the quiet nudges and stifled giggles, the smell of starch and lavender, and how Dad always cleared his throat when the sermon hit a little too close to home. But it was after church that the real magic began. We'd come home to a kitchen already warm from the oven. Grandma and Aunt Mary would have arrived ahead of us, sleeves rolled pots simmering, and laughter bubbling louder than any radio. The table would stretch to its limits, roast beef, mashed potatoes, green beans with bacon, and jello molds in colors no one could name. There was always one no one liked, but everyone took a spoonful just the same. The cousins would gather in the yard, shoes off, racing over grass, still damp with dew. The uncles played checkers on the porch, their conversations weaving in and out of the clink of iced tea glasses. And the older folks, they'd sit, swap stories, and watch the day drift by. No one looked at a clock. The only thing that mattered was that we were all there. That was the point. Presence. A kind of communion that didn't need wine or wafers. Now I look back and realize how rare that is, how sacred it was. We didn't take pictures. We didn't need to. It's all still there. The smells, the sounds, the soft joy that came from simply being together. Those Sundays taught me something that no textbook ever could. That home wasn't a place so much as a gathering. A shared moment in time wrapped in love and laughter and gravy that never quite thickened. And just like that, as the day gave way to dusk, we knew the world had slowed just enough for us to feel it. We didn't have screens to entertain us, not like kids do now. The entertainment was outside, and it waited for us like an old friend every morning. We played until our shoes wore thin and our voices turned hoarse. And even then, we only stopped when the streetlights flickered on. Stickball was the reigning king of games on our block. One bat, a rubber ball, and a few chalk lines drawn across the pavement, that was all we needed. The bases were sewer lids and tree stumps, and if the ball rolled under Mr. Dugan's porch, well, that meant a timeout and maybe a scolding. We raced on our bikes, streamers trailing from our handlebars like ribbons in the wind. No helmets, no elbow pads, just the occasional bandage and the sting of iodine later. Those bikes were more than just bicycles. They were horses, race cars, rocket ships, and sometimes even pirate vessels when we roamed the neighborhood, pretending the world was made of oceans and castles. There was hopscotch drawn with broken bits of chalk and stone. Jacks played on the sidewalk. Marbles flicked between dirt lines carved with the toe of a shoe. We made forts out of cardboard boxes and turned radio flyer wagons into pirate ships or space cruisers. Our imaginations worked overtime, and no one ever complained about being bored. When it rained, We didn't retreat inside. We turned puddles into battlefields and let the water soak our socks and splash our jeans. Mud was no enemy, it was part of the adventure. And on winter days, we built snow forts and pelted each other with snowballs until our gloves stiffened from cold. I remember roller skates with metal wheels loud and clunky but glorious. You tightened them with a key that hung around your neck, and when the toe clips gave out halfway down the block, you limped home with a bloody sock and a grin stretching from ear to ear. We didn't need screens. We had bruises and scraped knees and laughter that echoed between the houses long after sundown. We had each other. And we had the world, not in a palm-sized device, but right outside our doors, waiting to be explored. Our town didn't have a name that made it onto maps or postcards, but to us, it was the whole world wrapped into one gentle square mile. One gas station, one diner, one barber shop, and one grocer, all run by people who knew your birthday without asking. You didn't need a calendar because Miss June from the bakery always had a way of reminding you with a cupcake or a warm smile. There was no rush in our town. People walked slower. They lingered. They waved at passing cars, even if they didn't know who was driving, because chances were they did. The stoplight downtown blinked amber more than it changed. And if you sat long enough on a bench outside the Five and Dime, you'd hear every bit of gossip that kept the town humming. The barber Lou cut hair for nearly everyone. His hands knew the shape of every head that passed through his chair, and his stories, half-truths wrapped in charm, were free with every trim. It wasn't just about getting a haircut. It was about sitting still long enough to feel seen. Down the street, the corner drugstore still had a soda fountain, red stools that spun in half squeaks, and a long counter where cherry cokes were poured thick and slow. The waitress knew our orders by heart. Grilled cheese, extra crispy. A milkshake, split with your little brother. And you never left without dropping a nickel into the jukebox and letting Elvis or Buddy Holly fill the air. There was something sacred about how familiar everything felt. The way the postman tipped his hat. The way neighbors brought casseroles when someone was sick. The way a lost dog was everyone's responsibility until it found its way home. I remember how we trusted each other, how you could leave your keys in the ignition and your windows rolled down, how Mrs. Thompson across the street had a key to our back door in case of emergencies or if she just needed a cup of sugar and didn't want to bother us. There were no apps to track our whereabouts, no cameras to watch over us, just people, just eyes and hearts, and the quiet, sturdy kind of trust that came from knowing someone for decades. It wasn't perfect, but it was honest. That town, with its slow streets and creaky storefronts, taught me that community isn't built in a day. It's built in decades. In shared holidays and borrowed tools. In nods across pews and handshakes at gas stations. It's in the little things, the ones you don't think matter until they're gone. Even now, if I close my eyes, I can hear the bell above the hardware store door and smell the fresh popcorn from the matinee theater. I can feel the warmth of belonging, that quiet certainty that you are known. And if that isn't magic, I don't know what is. If you wanted to know how the world was changing in the 1950s, all you had to do was look around the house or turn on the radio. Everything hummed, clinked, or whirred. The toaster in our kitchen looked like it belonged on a spaceship, chrome-polished levers stiff, and a smell of hot metal when the bread popped up. Same with the blender. It wasn't silent like they are now. It roared, shook the counter, and made milkshakes so thick your straw bent in protest. But it worked, and more importantly, it felt like progress. Dad called appliances helpers, and he treated each one with the same care he gave the car. If something broke, he didn't toss it, he fixed it. With a wrench, a screwdriver, and patience. I remember sitting beside him in the garage, watching him take apart the vacuum cleaner, muttering like it was a living thing that needed talking to. And then there was the music. We had a record player the size of a dresser, with a lid that lifted like a treasure chest. On Saturdays, Dad would stack vinyls, Buddy Holly, Chuck Berry, Little Richard, and the music would spill through the house, bounce off the walls, and pour out the open windows. It was wild, fast, and louder than the world was ready for. The grown-ups tried to stay calm, but you could see it in their faces. This music was different. It had hips. It had motion. It made the kids want to dance and the parents want to pray. But deep down, I think they knew something was shifting. A generation starting to move to its own rhythm. Television was changing too. We had a black and white set the size of a small fridge. The screen was tiny, but it didn't matter. We'd gather close, adjust the rabbit ears, and hold our breath until the static cleared. When someone on the block got a color TV, the whole neighborhood crowded into their living room like it was a carnival. I still remember seeing a red dress on screen for the first time. It felt like a miracle. And the cars. Oh, the cars. Chrome and tail fins curves like sculpture, and engines that purred when idle and growled when provoked. Owning a Chevy Bel Air wasn't just having a way to get somewhere. It was a statement. You were somebody. You could pull up to the drive-in polish, still gleaming radio blaring, and for a moment, the world saw you. That was the thing about machines in the 50s. They weren't quiet or hidden. They didn't blend in. They announced themselves. They had style presence, and people took pride in knowing how they worked. There was respect between man and machine. You didn't just own it, you maintained it. And when it all came together, the music, the motion, the chrome and crackle of change, it felt like living at the dawn of something electric. Something that buzzed just beneath the skin of everyday life. We didn't know where it was headed. We only knew we were in it, right there dancing in the kitchen to the needle skipping on a 45. Back then, things weren't meant to be thrown away. They were meant to be repaired, restored, made whole again. It was a mindset, almost a ritual. You didn't replace, you respected. The radio on our kitchen counter had already outlived 2 presidents. It crackled and buzzed, but it still brought in the morning news and the Saturday ball games. When the tubes inside started to fade, Dad didn't throw it out. He opened the back, studied its guts like a surgeon, and gave it life again with a soldering iron and a steady hand. Shoes weren't tossed. When the soles wore thin, they were resoled. Mom kept a tin of polish under the sink, and once a week she'd line up our Sunday shoes and breathe new shine into them, soft circles of care rubbed in with an old rag. There was pride in making things last. The same went for the lawnmower, the toaster, the screen door hinge that always squeaked in the spring. Each item was part of the household, part of the rhythm of our days, and to let one die without trying to save it well, that just wasn't how we did things. Even toys were passed down mended and kept alive with bits of twine tape and imagination. My wagon had been my brother's and his before that. The handle was slightly bent. The paint chipped, but it rolled smooth, and that was what mattered. Fixing things wasn't just about saving money. It was about knowing how things worked. It was about paying attention. There was a quiet dignity in the way Dad turned a screwdriver, in the way Mom stitched a torn hem with even patient hands. They weren't just repairing objects, they were preserving memory, and maybe in some way, they were repairing time too, slowing it down, reminding us that not everything has to be new to be good. That's something I think we've lost. These days, things come with built-in obsolescence. Break it, toss it, replace it. But back then, when something broke, it was a challenge, a calling, a reminder that everything worth keeping requires care. There was a kind of poetry to it, a record needle set just right, a drawer that opened smooth after a touch of wax, a patched pair of jeans passed down again. Love wasn't always spoken. Sometimes it was built screwed tight and held together by hands that knew what mattered. Time didn't tick. In the 1950s, it stretched. It breathed. It gave you space to live between the minutes. We weren't racing toward anything. We were just being, just living. Mornings began with the sizzle of bacon, the clink of glass milk bottles left by the door, and the gentle thud of the newspaper on the stoop. There was no need to check a screen. The day's rhythm came through the window. Birdsong sunlight. A neighbor's dog barking somewhere down the block. You didn't gulp your coffee while rushing to a meeting. You sat at the table, read the headlines, and let the steam curl up into your thoughts. Life didn't start when you left the house. It started when you woke up slowly, steadily, with intention. We didn't multitask. We didn't wear earbuds or scroll through headlines while eating dinner. We listened. We looked one another in the eye. Conversation had weight. Silence had meaning. Summer afternoons were for porches and popsicles, for watching clouds drift lazily over the rooftop. If you got too hot, you opened the windows, let the fan hum in the corner, or stretched out on the cool tile of the kitchen floor. There was a kind of honesty to it, letting the weather in, letting the day take you as you were. Evenings were quieter, not silent, but softened. You'd hear the screen door creak as someone went out to water the flowers. The soft crackle of a radio show drifting from a living room down the street. And then just before bed, the television would sign off with the national anthem. No endless streams of programming, no late-night distractions. Just quiet and rest. There was a stillness in the world that felt like safety. It wasn't just the absence of noise. It was the presence of peace, of patience, of enough. When I think of those days, I don't remember the urgency or the errands. I remember the slowness, the gentleness, the way time didn't demand anything from you except to be there. It's strange now, looking at how fast everything moves, how little room there is for pause. But in those days, in that simpler, slower world, the pause was the point. And I suppose, in remembering, I've found it again. It's easy to forget the things that felt ordinary back then. The little comforts, the daily rituals, the sounds and scents that once wrapped themselves around us like a second skin. But those were the very things that shaped our days and softened our edges. We never questioned the clink of the milk bottles on the porch, or the smell of toast browning in the morning. The way the sun filtered through lace curtains casting dancing patterns on the kitchen linoleum. We didn't marvel at these moments. They were just there, dependable as breath. You didn't have to lock the door at night. The only key you worried about was the one hanging on a nail by the back door, shared freely with the neighbors. If someone needed sugar or flour, they'd knock or not and leave you a note by the cookie jar. We didn't think twice about running barefoot down the street or riding our bikes to the edge of town. The idea of danger didn't linger like it does now. Trust was the currency of the day, and we spent it freely. Dinner wasn't optional, and no one needed convincing to come to the table. You came because it was time, because the mashed potatoes were hot, and the green beans had bacon in them, and because someone had set your place with care. We said grace. We passed dishes. We listened. The phone rang, and someone answered, usually on the second ring. If you weren't home, you weren't reachable, and that was okay. People waited. Patience was part of life, not an inconvenience. We took for granted the silence between words, the cool breeze through an open car window, the way a firefly blinked in the backyard while your dad lit a cigarette and your mom folded a towel by the clothesline. Even boredom was a gift we didn't recognize. It pushed us to build things, to imagine, to dream. It sent us outside into dirt and dandelions where the real adventures lived. We didn't need plans, we just needed daylight. Looking back, I wonder if we knew how lucky we were. I don't think so. Not then. We thought it would last forever, that the world would always move at that pace, speak in that tone, hold us in that gentle, steady way. But it didn't. And that's why I hold these memories close. Because what we took for granted then is exactly what I cherish now. The sun is lower now, brushing golden streaks across the porch rail. I watch as light slips through the trees, slow and forgiving, the way it used to at the end of long summer days. This time of day always makes me quiet, makes me remember. There's a stillness just before dusk that feels like the world taking a breath. It's not quite evening, not yet night. It's the pause between things, the space where memory lives. I find myself back in those childhood moments without even trying, sitting on the steps, eating a slice of watermelon seeds, spit into the grass, listening to the hum of cicadas, watching the last of the neighborhood kids race their bikes home before supper. Dusk was when we gathered ourselves, when screen doors creaked open and porch lights clicked on, when moms called names into the twilight, and dads leaned back in lawn chairs, beer bottles sweating in their hands. It was the time of day when nothing much happened, and yet everything did. That's when the best talks happened, quiet ones, slow ones. Not about news or work or worry, but about things that mattered, how Grandpa met Grandma, why the stars look closer in the country, what it means to be a good man. As children, we didn't know we were absorbing anything. We just listened. But those words stuck, like dust on shoes after a walk through a dirt road. They traveled with us even when we didn't realize it. Now, in this stillness, I carry them all. The voices, the faces, the little things that built a life. A peanut butter sandwich in a tin lunchbox. A dog-eared library card. A kiss on the forehead before bed. They linger in the folds of memory, softer than sorrow, brighter than regret. And maybe that's why I come back here to the swing, to the hush of a slow evening. Not just to remember, but to hold what once was and what in some way still is. Because the world may have changed. It may be faster, louder, more distant. But the quiet truths of those days remain. They're stitched into the rhythm of who I became, of who we all became. The last light before dusk reminds me of that, of the beauty in slowness, in presence, in enough. Of a time when we didn't need more to feel whole. And as the sun slips behind the pines and the first star appears, I whisper, a thank you, not for the grand or the loud, but for just the little things,